One evening in February 2010, the McStay family, Joseph, his wife Summer, and their two little kids, seemed to vanish into thin air. Their cozy home in California looked mostly normal. Dinner was half-cooked, toys were left around, and their dogs were there but uncared for. But something felt wrong. The family's car was gone, their phones were off, and as the days went by, no one heard from them. As the police started digging into the case, they uncovered a mystery full of secrets and betrayal. What happened to the McStay family? And how did no one notice what was coming? Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr. were a joyful family, living in a lovely new home in Fallbrook, California. Joseph, the family's main provider, ran a successful decorative fountain business. February 4th, 2010, began as a regular day for the family. Joseph called his father, Patrick, to explain that he was running late for a business lunch. Meanwhile, Summer had been in touch with her sister, who had recently given birth, telling her that she was busy setting things up in their new home. Over the next few days, communication from Joseph and Summer to their relatives abruptly stopped. While some thought it was simply due to their busy lives and caring for two young children, Joseph's father, Patrick, found the situation odd. He had a close relationship with his son and wasn't used to being ignored. As his concern grew, he asked his other son, Michael, to check on Joseph's home. At first, Michael didn't share the same level of worry, believing that his brother was simply caught up in daily tasks and would reconnect soon. Patrick, however, persisted, and eventually, Michael agreed to visit the house. When Michael arrived, he noticed that the family car was gone, but their dogs were still at the house, seemingly uncared for. The doors were locked, but Michael managed to get inside through a window. Inside, things were off. There was spoiled food in the kitchen and popcorn scattered in the living room. Despite these oddities, Michael initially thought the family had gone on a trip. However, it was unusual that they hadn't told anyone, so Michael alerted the authorities to his brother's disappearance. The police found no sign of forced entry or violence, though it seemed the family had left in a hurry. By February 8th, the family's car was discovered abandoned near the border crossing between the U.S. and Mexico. Surveillance footage from the border showed a family of 4 walking into Mexico, but the video quality was poor, leaving the police uncertain if it was indeed the McStays. Further investigation revealed that Summer had recently searched for information about Mexico on her computer, leading to speculation that the family had left voluntarily. However, Joseph's father, Patrick, firmly believed that his son would never leave without informing anyone. Joseph's mother, after viewing the footage, was sure the man shown was not Joseph, based on his walk. Michael and Susan took over Joseph's business, while Patrick felt increasingly left out, especially as he was estranged from Susan and had little contact with Michael. Months passed with no solid leads, and the case was handed over to the FBI by April 2010. Unfortunately, the authorities still considered the family's disappearance a voluntary departure, resulting in a lack of exhaustive efforts to find them. The absence of any clear evidence of a crime also prevented police from obtaining access to Joseph's financial records. For more than 3 years, the case remained cold until November 13, 2013, when a motorcyclist stumbled upon a horrific discovery while riding in the Mojave Desert. He found what appeared to be a child's skull and promptly notified the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. Upon further investigation, authorities uncovered 2 shallow graves containing the remains of 4 people, 2 adults, and 2 children. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr. Alongside the remains, a 3-pound sledgehammer was found, identified as the murder weapon. Forensic examinations concluded that the family had died from blunt force trauma, likely having been tortured before their deaths. The autopsy revealed that young Joseph Jr. had suffered multiple severe blows to the head, while Joseph Sr. was found with an electrical cord wrapped around his neck. With this grim discovery, the case took a dark turn and was now considered a homicide. Investigators began reconstructing the family's final months by interviewing friends, family, and examining phone records and security footage. A key breakthrough came when security footage from a neighbor's camera revealed that the last person to meet with Joseph on February 4th was his business partner, Charles Chase Merritt. Prior to the discovery of the bodies, Chase had been interviewed by authorities, during which he claimed to have spoken with Joseph on the phone at least twice on the day of the disappearance. Chase had also told the media that Joseph was his best friend, and in one interview, he mentioned being the last person to see Joseph, a statement that raised suspicion among detectives. Chase's behavior after the disappearance was concerning. In an early police interview, he referred to Joseph in the past tense, saying, "He was my best friend." When questioned about this after the bodies were found, Chase claimed he hadn't realized he was speaking that way. Chase had also told police that on February 4th, he and Joseph had a business meeting over lunch to discuss financial matters. During that meeting, Chase said Joseph gave him physical copies of checks for ongoing projects. Further investigation into these checks revealed discrepancies. Digital records indicated that while the checks were dated February 4th, they had actually been written several days after the family disappeared. This led investigators to suspect that Chase had forged the checks to make it appear as though they had been issued before the disappearance. Moreover, detectives uncovered that Chase had a gambling addiction and had been stealing money from Joseph's business accounts for months. It was speculated that Joseph had discovered this, leading to tension between the two and possibly providing Chase with a motive for murder. Police later uncovered that Chase had also issued checks totaling over $21,000 from Joseph McStay's business account in the days following the family's murder. Merritt then went on gambling sprees, losing significant amounts of money in casinos. A bank's customer service employees also revealed to investigators that someone claiming to be Joseph McStay had called to request the complete deletion of his account and all related information. However, the caller failed to provide the correct password, so the request couldn't be processed. When authorities traced the call, they discovered it came not from Joseph's phone, but from Charles Merritt's. Further investigation revealed that on February 1st, Joseph had sent an email claiming that Chase owed him almost $43,000. Adding to this, cell phone data placed Merritt in the Mojave Desert 2 days after the McStay family disappeared. Authorities believed Merritt knew the area well, having grown up nearby. During the investigation, police also received a DNA profile from the McStay family car. DNA found on the steering column and gear shift matched Charles Merritt. With mounting evidence against Merritt, detectives concluded that he had murdered the McStay family. The theory proposed by investigators was that Merritt had killed the family with a sledgehammer, transported their bodies to the Mojave Desert, and buried them in shallow graves. He then drove the family's car to the border near Mexico, abandoning it there to mislead investigators into believing that the family had fled to Mexico. It's also believed that Merritt was the one who conducted searches about Mexico on Summer's computer. On November 5, 2014, Charles Merritt was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Though he vehemently denied the accusations, he was arrested and brought to trial. However, the trial faced numerous delays as Merritt fired several of his attorneys and even attempted to represent himself at one point. Over the span of 2 years, he cycled through 5 different lawyers. The trial finally began on January 7, 2019. Prosecutors entered the trial confident in their case, presenting substantial evidence linking Merritt to the murders, along with a clear motive. They argued that Joseph had confronted Merritt about the money he had been stealing from the business, threatening to report him to the authorities. Merritt, who had a criminal record involving theft and fraud, panicked, fearing a lengthy prison sentence. As a result, prosecutors suggested he decided to kill Joseph and his entire family to silence them. The prosecution believed that Merritt first killed Joseph and then lured Summer and the children to their deaths. After murdering the family, Merritt hid the bodies for 2 days, during which time he accessed Joseph's bank account and issued the fraudulent checks. On February 6th, he allegedly transported the bodies to the desert, dug 2 shallow graves, and buried them along with the murder weapon. He later abandoned the family car near the border, though his DNA left inside the vehicle would become crucial evidence. During the trial, the prosecution presented security footage that supposedly showed Merritt's truck leaving the McStay residence. However, the video was blurry, leading to debate over whether it truly was Merritt's truck. The defense seized on this and other inconsistencies, including the unclear location of the murders. Prosecutors could not definitively say if the killings occurred in the family home or elsewhere, such as the desert. Merritt's defense team argued that he had an alibi. His girlfriend at the time testified that Merritt was with her at home on the night of February 4, 2010. His daughter also stated that she remembered her father being home that night. As for Merritt's cell phone data placing him in the Mojave Desert on February 6th, the defense explained that he could have been in the area to visit his sister. Juanita, Chase's sister, testified that her brother frequently visited her, though she couldn't recall if he had visited on that specific day. However, prosecutors confronted Juanita with a recorded police interview from 2013 in which she claimed that Charles rarely visited her and hadn't done so for 5 years, which contradicted her trial testimony. The defense also tried several tactics to derail the trial, including accusing prosecutors of withholding evidence and requesting that key figures in the case be removed. However, the judge overseeing the case rejected these motions, allowing the trial to proceed. Chase Merritt's defense attorneys argued that the prosecution failed to thoroughly investigate other individuals who had motives to harm Joseph McStay. They pointed to 3 men they considered persons of interest, with the first being Joseph's brother, Michael McStay. When Michael took the stand, Charles Merritt's attorney asked him several pointed questions, suggesting he could be responsible for the crime. The lawyer inquired about Michael's relationship with his brother, to which both Michael and the rest of the family asserted that it was good. However, the defense raised doubts, questioning why Michael did not immediately go to check on his brother's home and why he was slow to report the family's disappearance. In response, Michael admitted that he hadn't been overly concerned at first, thinking his brother had simply gone on a trip with his family. The defense also suggested that the truck seen in the security footage could have been Michael's, not Charles. But a particularly strange detail that led some people to suspect Michael was that before the family's bodies were found, he told officers that he hoped they weren't buried in shallow graves. This statement caused significant debate, as the McStay family was indeed discovered in shallow graves in the Mojave Desert. Many found it suspicious that Michael could have imagined this scenario with such accuracy. However, Joseph and Michael's parents dismissed the comment as an unfortunate coincidence, while others found it highly unusual. In addition to Michael, the defense also pointed the finger at Joseph's other business partner, a man named Dan Kavanaugh, who managed Joseph's online sales. Dan, known as Dan the Hacker due to his computer expertise, worked with Joseph to promote and sell their products online. His compensation was a percentage of the online sales. Dan had previously been on police radar when his ex-girlfriend, Tracy, accused him of confessing to the murders in early 2018. Tracy's claims were dismissed, however, as she had a history of substance abuse and was on bad terms with Dan, leading the authorities to believe she might be trying to falsely incriminate him. According to Charles Merritt's defense team, Dan had a strong motive to harm Joseph. At the end of 2009, Joseph and Dan had clashed over profit distribution. Dan believed he was entitled to a share of not just the online sales but all sales, while Joseph disagreed and initially refused to pay more. Dan allegedly threatened to ruin Joseph's online business by redirecting his website's traffic to adult sites. Ultimately, Joseph agreed to give Dan more money, including his BMW and additional payments. The last of these payments was due around the time of the family's disappearance. After the murders, Dan continued to work with Susan, Michael, and Charles to keep the business running, but he later sold the company in June 2011, pocketing over $100,000. The defense argued that Dan's exclusion from certain projects and lack of payments could have pushed him over the edge. However, Dan had a solid alibi. He was vacationing in Hawaii with his girlfriend during the time of the murders. His ex-girlfriend testified that they were together on February 4, 2010, and posted photos to Facebook as evidence. While some people questioned the validity of social media posts as proof, the ex-girlfriend maintained that she had no reason to lie for Dan, as they were no longer together and had parted on bad terms. The police eventually confirmed that Dan had indeed been in Hawaii at the time of the killings. During the trial, the defense also brought up Joseph's ex-wife's partner, suggesting that he too could have been involved. Joseph had a son named Jonah with his ex-wife, and tensions between Joseph and her new partner had escalated prior to the murders. Nevertheless, the police ruled him out as a suspect. Despite the defense's efforts to shift attention away from Charles Merritt, by June 2019, the jury found Merritt guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Before the sentencing hearing, the victims' families gave emotional statements. Patrick, Joseph's father, addressed Merritt, saying that Joseph had done so much to help him and his family, particularly when Merritt faced legal troubles in 2009. Susan, Joseph's mother, called Merritt a despicable monster who had brutally killed 2 innocent children, her grandchildren. She labeled him a coward and a baby killer. Summer's sister tearfully shared how their family would forever be scarred by the loss of their loved ones. Joseph's eldest son, Jonah, also spoke, recounting the devastating impact of losing his father, stepmother, and younger siblings when he was just 12 years old. After hearing these victim impact statements, Merritt asked to speak. Through tears, he insisted on his innocence, declaring that he did not commit the murders and did not deserve what was happening to him. "I didn't do it," he said. "With God as my witness, I will prove everyone wrong." He added that he loved Joseph and would never have hurt him or his family. Merritt's sentencing was delayed after he once again requested to dismiss his attorney, though the judge rejected this motion. His legal team also filed for a new trial, accusing the prosecution of misconduct, but this request was also denied. Finally, on January 21, 2020, after years of delays, the San Bernardino Superior Court sentenced Charles Merritt, then 62 years old, to death. Despite the death sentence, it is unlikely that Merritt will ever be executed, as California has not carried out an execution since 2006. Instead, Merritt will likely spend the rest of his life in the death row. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. "17-year-old Rudy Farias was reported missing by his mother in 2015, adding to a series of family tragedies. In 2011, Rudy witnessed his brother's death in a car accident, and in 2014, his father took his own life. When Rudy disappeared, it seemed like another misfortune had befallen the family. However, on June 29, 2023, Rudy was found alive. Investigators soon discovered that Rudy had never actually been missing. He had been living at home with his mother the entire time. He had even spoken to police over the years using a fake name. This case has raised many questions. Why did his mother report him missing? What was Rudy doing during those 8 years? Why did he use a false identity? And why did it take so long for the truth to come out? Rudolph Farias, known to everyone as Rudy, was born in Houston, Texas. He lived with his mother, Janie Santana, and his older brother Charles, who was from Janie's previous relationship. Janie had been married to another man for 10 years. Rudy's father, also named Rudolph Farias, was a veteran officer from the Houston police who remained distant, having another family with 5 more children. For Rudy, his older brother was a crucial figure in his upbringing. Rudy once shared on Facebook how important Charles was to him. He recounted how, during his time at school, he was often teased for being small and skinny. But whenever things got tough, Charles would step in to defend and protect him. Charles was more than just a brother. He was Rudy's best friend and father figure. However, Rudy sometimes felt a tinge of jealousy because Charles had a good relationship with his father, who often visited and took Charles out, bringing back cool toys or Happy Meal surprises from McDonald's. According to Rudy, Charles noticed his sadness and one day talked to him, acknowledging Rudy's hurt over not seeing his father. Charles promised he would always be there for Rudy and never abandon him. The brothers grew up inseparable, relying on each other under the strict and unstable supervision of their mother, Janie. To explain Janie's instability, judicial records show she had used at least 5 different surnames over the years, including Diaz, Rodriguez, Farias, and Ortega. The records also indicate that Jenny had been married several times, with at least one marriage annulled because one of her ex-partners claimed she was married to 2 other people simultaneously. She also had a history of minor criminal offenses, such as public disorder on November 22, 1994, inappropriate conduct with a loaded firearm in 1996, and driving without a license with a minor, presumed to be Rudy, in 2020. Additionally, she had been arrested for speeding and driving under the influence. Janie also created social media accounts on platforms like TikTok and Facebook, using photos that were not hers. According to different sources, Janie once stole pictures of a country singer to use on a fake profile. Despite the tumultuous household, there was always pride for the eldest son, Charles. He benefited from his father's financial support but remained humble and down to earth. Charles was an excellent brother, son, and student. He graduated from high school in 2007 and was accepted into the U.S. Marine Corps, with training set to begin on March 21, 2011. At 21, Charles dreamed of serving his country, but his life was tragically cut short in a motorcycle accident on February 13, 2011. Charles's sudden and tragic death profoundly impacted the family. Rudy, who was 13 at the time, expressed his grief on Facebook, detailing the events of that fateful day. He recounted how they woke up together that morning, and Charles asked Rudy to help him get the motorcycle out of the garage. After preparing, Charles left to meet friends, marking the last time Rudy saw his brother alive. A family friend called later that day to inform them that Charles had been in an accident and his body was lying on the pavement. Rudy and Janie rushed to the scene. Rudy recalled that at first he couldn't see his brother. Then he saw his mother on the ground, holding Charles and pleading with God to bring her son back. Rudy described how he froze, staring at his brother lifeless on the ground. This state of shock stayed with him for a long time. He told his loved ones that he found it difficult to even say the word death. He preferred to think that his brother had fallen asleep forever and often said he would soon meet Charles in heaven. At Charles's military funeral, Rudy delivered an emotional speech expressing how much he would miss his brother, who was the closest thing he had to a father. He shared that Charles taught him many things, but not how to live without him. The following years were tough for Janie and Rudy. The void left by Charles was a heavy burden to bear. Rudy began experiencing recurrent episodes of post-traumatic stress and depression. He even started self-harming, scratching his wrists with sharp objects like aluminum cans. On August 19, 2014, 3 years after his brother's death, Rudy received news that his father, aged 51, had also died tragically. The lifeless body of Rudy's father was found in his uniform inside his patrol car. He had parked in a secluded area outside Houston, where he decided to take his own life using his service weapon. The police report on the incident revealed that shortly before, he had been relieved of his duties pending an internal affairs investigation. Rudolph had been with the Houston Police Department since May 1993. A police spokesperson detailed that Rudolph was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation into criminal conduct allegations. The suspension meant he had no police duties and was assigned closely supervised desk work with little to no public contact. It is noteworthy that Rudolph was one of 4 officers under investigation for manipulating speeding tickets issued by the Houston Police Department's Traffic Enforcement Unit. There were instances, for example, of tickets being issued at the same time in different locations hundreds of miles apart. There were also questionable tickets issued late at night. Police sources explained that the motive behind these irregularities was to commit fraud to earn overtime pay. Records show that Rudolph earned $158,000 in overtime since 2012. Although Rudolph was an absent figure, his death affected Rudy, who once again expressed his feelings on Facebook. He thanked those who sent condolences for his father, even though he had never known him. Rudy acknowledged feeling pain because his father's death permanently closed any possibility of a father-son relationship. He confessed that he never expected to feel anything for his father, but in the end, he experienced pain, sadness, lethargy, and other confusing emotions. Amid the emotional turmoil, on March 6, 2015, Rudy left his house around 6 p.m. to walk his two dogs in northwest Houston. A few hours later, one of the dogs returned home. The second dog came back the next morning, according to a police report. On March 7, 2015, Rudy's mother reported him missing. A missing persons flyer from that year noted that Rudy had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety, and that he might have stopped taking his prescribed medication. The flyer described Rudy as having suffered a leg injury that caused a slight limp. Rudy's cousin told the New York Post that although Rudy was 17, his mental age was around 10. Some of Rudy's family speculated that he might have been kidnapped and sold into a human trafficking ring. 2 years after his disappearance in May 2017, authorities put up a billboard in North Houston to draw attention from local residents in hopes that someone might provide clues to find him. On March 22, 2015, a GoFundMe campaign was launched to help Janie in her search for her son, Rudy. At the time, she claimed Rudy had physical and mental disabilities. The campaign raised $2,025. In 2017, Janie told a news channel that detectives had informed her Rudy might have been kidnapped and sold to human traffickers. However, the case grew more perplexing as sightings of Rudy were reported between 2018 and 2022. In 2018, another of Rudy's cousins called Houston police, saying she had seen Rudy at Janie's house. However, when officers arrived, they found no sign of him. She also mentioned that her grandmother often said she talked to Rudy, but as she was elderly, her claims were not taken seriously. The grandmother insisted that Rudy walked around the house. During a 2020 dispute over the grandmother's guardianship, Janie's sisters accused her of forcing their mother to live in a poorly maintained house. They wanted to move the elderly woman to another home because the current one was so run down that she slept on the couch as there was no bed. Additionally, the sisters alleged that the house was filled with animal urine and feces, causing the grandmother to suffer from skin infections. Despite Janie's denials, the grandmother continued to tell the family she saw and spoke to Rudy. Around the same time, neighbors began reporting seeing a young man resembling Rudy entering and leaving Janie's house. A detective from the Houston Police Department's Missing Persons Unit said that when Janie was questioned about the young man visiting her house, she claimed he was her nephew, not her son. On June 29, 2023, around 10 p.m., a person found Rudy severely injured outside a church in southeast Houston. The young man had bruises all over his body, especially on his face. On July 3, 2023, Janie issued a statement thanking the media and the public for their support over the years. She announced that her son Rudy had been found after being missing for 8 years. Janie mentioned that she had no additional information at that moment but confirmed that Rudy was found unconscious and that the police and 911 were immediately notified. She assured everyone that Rudy was receiving the necessary care to overcome his trauma, but noted that he could not communicate verbally and requested privacy during this difficult time. Adding to the dramatic turn of events, Janie mentioned that Rudy was found clutching the chain his brother Charles used to wear around his neck. She later shared a photo of Rudy in a hospital bed. Rudy's aunts, however, disputed the authenticity of the photo, stating it was taken in 2012. On July 5, 2023, Rudy and his mother met with detectives from the Houston Police Department's Missing Persons Unit at a hotel. They were joined by Quanell X, a prominent activist and advisor for the local Black Panther movement. After the meeting, Quanell X told the media that Rudy had confided in him about experiencing oppressive practices and significant suffering over the past 8 years. He suggested that Janie should be investigated and possibly detained as Rudy, now 25, had endured uncomfortable situations implying a degree of intimacy, but did not label them as sexual in nature. Quanell X informed the press that Rudy had been found outside the church because he had taken his mother's car to escape, but ended up crashing it. He also mentioned that Rudy had been visiting neighbors under an alias. Following the press conference, Quanell X retracted his statements in an interview with The Independent, accusing the police of attempting a cover-up. He recommended providing Rudy with medical and psychological help. A video of Janie in front of her house surfaced on social media, where she expressed that she expected to be arrested. The video was recorded by local residents. On July 6, 2023, the police held their first press conference since Rudy was found. They confirmed that Rudy had returned home the day after being reported missing in 2015 and that his mother had misled the police by continuing to claim he was missing, asserting that the person seen by friends and family around the house was a nephew. The police explained that the district attorney had declined to press charges at that time since being missing is not a crime. That same day, Rudy's aunt reported that she had met with her nephew. She stated that Rudy was traumatized, did not want to be near his mother, and was staying with family friends. She called her sister Janie a pathological liar who had mistreated their mother, who had since passed away. She recalled how their late mother always insisted that Rudy was living in the house, only to be dismissed as lying by Janie. Learning that Rudy had been alive and controlled by his mother for 8 years, his cousin told a reporter that she felt more concern than relief. She found it disturbing that Janie had lied and hidden her adult son for 8 years for reasons that remained unclear. As more details of the case emerged, reporters found Janie's address and started arriving in her neighborhood. Janie became nervous and began offering money to residents, asking them to stay silent and not reveal that they had seen a young man entering and leaving the house when detectives and journalists arrived. Disturbed neighbors pointed out that the young man they now identify as Rudy had always been known to them as Dolph, Janie's nephew. Amid the media frenzy and the community's astonishment at the bizarre case, Janie's whereabouts remain unknown as she appears to have left her family home. A news media confirmed that activists and neighbors gathered on July 7th in front of Rudy's house in East Houston, demanding a thorough investigation by the district attorney and criminal charges against Rudy's mother. On July 13th, Rudy made his first public statements after spending 8 years hidden away due to his mother's actions, attracting worldwide attention. He explained how he stayed out of sight for so long out of obedience. Rudy agreed to the on-camera interview, but asked to have his face concealed because he felt overwhelmed by the attention his case had generated. He accused his mother, Janie, of brainwashing him, clarifying that he was never physically locked up or tied down. He could come and go as he pleased, but chose not to because she convinced him the world was a hostile place, and they could only survive by staying together at home. The police added that although Rudy was listed as a missing person, he and his mother interacted with officers using false names and birthdays to hide their identities. During the interview, Rudy described feeling trapped in his own home for years, likening it to living in a prison. He recounted how Janie would lock him in a room whenever family members visited. He could hear them chatting and laughing but could not join in. Rudy shared that he eventually began to yearn for freedom to have a job, live a life, love someone, and be loved. He fought to understand his emotions. Janie manipulated him into believing he had to stay silent for his own good, bombarding him with negative thoughts that made him complicit in the charade. It was a form of mental imprisonment, Rudy explained, as he could work with his mother as a security guard and roam the neighborhood, but always under her watchful eye. Following his reappearance and contact with people who clarified the situation, Rudy said his relationship with his mother felt like Stockholm Syndrome. This psychological coping mechanism involves victims developing positive feelings towards their captor to survive. Rudy expressed that his mother had psychologically imprisoned him and wielded significant power over him as his sole parental figure since childhood, alongside his late brother. Despite answering all the reporters' questions about his false disappearance, some of Rudy's explanations still leave gaps. For instance, when asked if he ever questioned Janie about why they kept pretending he was missing, he said he did not remember. Regarding the allegations by activist Quinnell X about inappropriate advances by his mother, Rudy stated that the media had twisted his words. He mentioned occasionally sleeping with his mother but did not recall why, asserting it was not intimate, though he felt uncomfortable with it. Reporters also asked if his mother had ever drugged him. Rudy recalled an incident when he was about 12 years old and she gave him a bottle of Tylenol PM or sleeping pills. According to Rudy, his mother forced him to go to the hospital, making him pretend he was sick from an overdose. He couldn't remember why she did this, but suggested it might have been because she had something to do at school. He added that around the time of his supposed disappearance, he didn't know how to handle his emotions, especially since it happened right after his brother, Charles, passed away. When asked if his mother wanted him to take on a husband-like role at home, he said yes, but only in terms of shared responsibilities, like cooking and cleaning, with nothing romantic or intimate involved. Rudy told the reporters that he finally decided to leave home because he wanted to end the life he was living, where his mother kept him hidden, manipulated him, and made him believe the outside world was dangerous. When asked what message he would send to his mother if she saw the interview, Rudy replied that he wanted her to leave him alone and let him live his life and be happy. Throughout the interview, Rudy's tone was marked by anxiety and distress. In response to Rudy's shocking and unexpected revelations, his Aunt Pauline spoke to the media, expressing her deep concern for her nephew and noting that Rudy was still scared. Janie's whereabouts remain unknown, but it's possible she will face legal action from GoFundMe for benefiting from the false disappearance story. The fundraising platform stated that she had been permanently banned from GoFundMe and future beneficiary opportunities after the scam came to light. GoFundMe has a zero-tolerance policy for misuse of the platform and cooperates with police investigations into alleged misconduct. The GoFundMe campaign claimed Janie was a single mother who lost her eldest son in 2011 and Rudy's father in 2014. She needed financial help as she couldn't work due to dedicating herself to searching for her missing son. Consequently, bills were piling up, and her health had deteriorated mentally, physically, and emotionally. Brenda Paradise, a private investigator who worked on the case, believes resources were misused in the search for Rudy. Brenda is part of the nonprofit organization We Help the Missing. She mentioned that volunteers searched wooded areas and made exhaustive efforts to find Rudy. She shared some of her audio notes from 2015, where Janie accused a gang of Mexicans of kidnapping her son, but this alleged group never contacted her. Brenda has not ruled out filing a lawsuit for the expenses incurred by the association during Rudy's 8-year disappearance. Rudy's case highlights the vulnerability of minors under negligent or abusive parents. In 2018, Approximately 9.2 out of every 1,000 children in the United States were subjected to some form of maltreatment, according to the Children's Bureau. Neglect is the most common form of maltreatment, present in 60% of cases, as reported by the same bureau. Neglect occurs when a parent or guardian fails to meet a child's basic needs, whether medical, educational, physical, or emotional. The combination of oppression and deprivation of liberty seen in Rudy's case is common in situations involving Stockholm Syndrome within controlling relationships. One way these feelings and thoughts develop is through cognitive dissonance, which explains how and why people change their ideas and opinions to endure situations that don't seem healthy, positive, or normal. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Allie Kostiel was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but she always dreamed of attending the University of Mississippi. When she finally got this opportunity, she felt like her life had reached its peak. However, things took a dark turn. Investigators noted that no clues or evidence could have alerted Allie's friends before her life was tragically cut short on that fateful July afternoon. Detectives arriving at the crime scene were baffled by how someone could commit such an act against a well-behaved, easygoing student. Their attention quickly turned to their prime suspect, another student with a hidden agenda that no one could have anticipated. Alexandria Kostiel was born on September 11, 1997, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her long name was quickly shortened to the affectionate nickname Allie, which is what her loved ones always called her. Allie was the daughter of Cindy and Keith Kostiel, and she had a younger brother named Andrew. From an early age, Allie showed a strong sense of responsibility towards her studies, coupled with her athletic talents. These attributes helped her excel as a standout student at high school. In addition to her academic success, Allie was an active cheerleader, part of the track and field team, the golf team, and a member of the National Honor Society. Her adventurous spirit also led her to volunteer in Peru and Africa, where she taught English to young children. Cindy and Keith were extremely proud of their daughter, as Allie's affection and light touched everyone around her. She loved animals and children, often working as a babysitter to earn some money, and her caring nature made her a favorite among families. Allie also enjoyed dog walking and was an enthusiast of yoga and half-marathon running. Her spiritual nature and constant smile made her approachable to everyone. During this period of her life, she formed a deep bond with Maddie Norris. The two became inseparable, sharing dreams and secrets in a way that felt like they had known each other in previous lives. Their friendship was more like a sisterhood, leading to many shared adventures. After graduating in 2016, Allie enrolled at the University of Mississippi to study business administration. She was thrilled to be part of an institution rich in tradition, history, and football. Her parents witnessed the excitement and joy this new chapter brought to her life. Allie also dreamed of meeting a charming Southern boy with whom she could one day start a family. Despite the distance, her friendship with Maddie remained as strong as ever. It was no surprise to her loved ones that Allie thrived not only academically but also socially. She quickly made new, meaningful friendships, including one with Elizabeth, whom she met at a campus party. They shared several common interests, which solidified their close bond. Among the new people in her life, one stood out as particularly special to Allie, driven by her innocent romantic aspirations. She set her sights on Brandon Thiesfeld, a young man just a year older than her from Fort Worth, Texas. Brandon was the son of Daniel Thiesfeld, a medical professional. Brandon enjoyed an idyllic childhood filled with love and all the comforts any child could wish for. Raised in a good Christian family, he had ample opportunities for outdoor activities like hunting and fishing in the vast Texan landscape. As he grew older, he also shone as a football player at his school. Like Allie, Brandon was a student at the University of Mississippi's Business School. They shared mutual acquaintances and even attended some classes together. However, Brandon's temperament was quite different from Allie's. But as the saying goes, opposites attract. According to local records, Brandon was arrested in April 2017 for public intoxication and possessing a fake ID. This wasn't his only brush with the law. He was involved in another incident, though the Oxford Police Department later confirmed that the records of this case were expunged and sealed. Despite these isolated incidents and the generally good conduct Brandon displayed, there was someone who did not find him particularly likable and had reasons for such a perception. Rex Ravita, another student who lived in a dormitory across the hall from Brandon during their freshman year, frequently encountered him. Rex found Brandon's behavior objectionable, considering him a spoiled daddy's boy. According to Rex, Brandon often boasted about his father's wealth and how it could get him out of any trouble, which Rex found particularly annoying. Additionally, Rex had noticed another particularly unpleasant trait in Brandon. He often treated women in a degrading manner. One night when Allie and Brandon crossed paths at a local bar, she felt an immediate attraction. It didn't take long for them to start dating occasionally, though Allie wished they spent more time together. She often brought him along as her date to most of her parties. However, to almost everyone observing their developing relationship, it was clear that Brandon wasn't as enamored with Allie as she was with him. Despite this, Allie seemed blinded by her initial impression and Brandon's good looks, never seeing through the facade. The evident disinterest from Brandon and his flaws, which were apparent to everyone else, went unnoticed by Allie. She was convinced she had found her dream man and envisioned a future with a home and family. As weeks and months passed, their relationship grew complicated. Around their second year in college, driven by her intense feelings, Allie sent Brandon numerous late-night texts while she was out partying, eager to chat with him. Without any explanation, he blocked her number. During this time, Maddie visited Oxford to see her friend and unofficial sister. Naturally, she was excited to meet the new man in Allie's life, but to her surprise, Brandon didn't show up. During that visit, Maddie became concerned about Brandon's clear detachment, despite the affection Allie lavished on him. Despite this, Allie seemed to be doing well in many other areas of her life. By her third year, she had formed a strong friendship with another university student named Morgan. It was around this time that Brandon inexplicably reappeared as if nothing had happened, seeking to reconnect with Allie. Allie interpreted this gesture as a sign of mutual romantic interest and became filled with hope. However, she was the only one who saw it that way. To everyone else, it was strange, knowing that Brandon had no genuine feelings for her. One of the most astonished by the situation was Rex. Upon learning about the supposed romance between Allie and Brandon, he believed that the young Texan was emotionally manipulating her, making her think he loved her, something Rex was sure was false. Deep down, Allie might have been aware of Brandon's lack of affection. This could explain why her closest friends and even her parents knew very little about him. References to Brandon and their relationship were quite vague. Consequently, none of Allie's close ones were aware of the emotional abuse she was experiencing. Allie often found herself in tears over the man she loved. Her roommate at the time occasionally noticed the sadness in Allie's eyes. However, as she mentioned in a later interview, Allie was a girl who radiated pure light and had the ability to appear happy even when she was sad. According to her, Allie's kindness blinded her to others' malice, making her see people as better than they actually were. In April 2019, Allie told Brandon that she was worried she might be pregnant and sent him a picture of a home pregnancy test. The results were inconclusive, but given the gravity of the situation, Allie expressed her desire to discuss it in person. Brandon's immediate response was like a cold shower. He bluntly stated he had no intention of staying with her if she was indeed pregnant. Over the next 3 months, Allie tried to meet with him to talk about it, but Brandon avoided her at all costs. Sometimes he would agree to meet and then cancel at the last minute. Other times, he simply wouldn't show up and offered no explanation afterward. Amid this emotional roller coaster, Allie continued with her life, hoping the situation would improve, and only communicated with Brandon electronically. Unbeknownst to her, Brandon was spending long hours trying to find a solution to what he saw as a major problem. He spent days researching online about medications and clinics for terminating a pregnancy. Unsatisfied with these options, he even considered more extreme scenarios, looking up how to use a weapon and hide a crime. In the midst of the uncertainty about their relationship status, the vacation period arrived. Allie decided not to travel back home to Missouri. Given that she was in her final year and had high academic ambitions, she chose to stay at the university in July to attend a summer course. Additionally, she was teaching fitness classes at the time, which motivated her to sacrifice her break to earn extra money for her expenses. However, Cindy and Keith were not willing to miss the opportunity to be with their daughter. They informed her that they would come to visit. Allie was overjoyed at the news. Once her parents arrived at her apartment, the three of them had the most wonderful days together. Allie and her mother went shopping and chatted endlessly about countless things. There was so much to catch up on that the hours seemed too short. Knowing Allie's love for the sea and the beach, Cindy gifted her several new items, all with a marine theme, to reflect her interests in her home. Allie, in turn, repeatedly asked her mother to cook her favorite dishes. When it was time to say goodbye in mid-July 2019, Allie wished her parents could stay for at least one more day. As Cindy and Keith headed back home, they comforted themselves with the thought that their next reunion was just around the corner and they just needed to be patient. Shortly after, Brandon contacted Allie via text message. Just as he had done previously, disappearing and reappearing months later as if nothing had happened, this time he requested a meeting to discuss the delicate matter in person. On Friday, July 19, 2019, back in St. Louis, Cindy called her daughter to confirm everything was all right. True to her word, Allie went to a bar that night. A while later, surveillance cameras captured her leaving the place, wearing a white shirt and blue shorts, with her head down, seemingly texting. The footage shows her in front of the door, though she doesn't enter the establishment. Afterward, Allie returned home but left again without her roommates hearing. Around midnight, she finally met up with Brandon. The details of what transpired next have been elusive to the authorities. No one knows what was said or the tone of their conversation. It's assumed there were accusations and clarifications, but this remains speculative. What is certain is that Allie and Brandon met face-to-face at a lake, a vast area surrounded by numerous campsites and recreational spaces. Due to its size and characteristics, the sheriff's department has long patrolled its various nooks and crannies. During the early hours of Saturday, July 20th, 2019, the moonlight was the only illumination for the patrolling officers. The prevailing darkness was far from romantic. According to police sources, a local resident walking their dog reported hearing gunshots in the early hours of that morning, between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. The attacker fled the scene. Around 10:30 a.m., a police investigator was on patrol, not expecting to discover the lifeless body of a young woman. The discovery occurred near an abandoned fishing camp, a remote location about 20 miles from the university. Overcoming the initial shock, the police officer was able to gather some general information about the victim. This experience marked a significant turning point in his career. Allie's purse, containing her school ID and driver's license, was found nearby shortly afterward. When the police department was notified, investigators began their efforts to uncover what had happened. They attempted to trace Allie's cell phone but were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, that Saturday, Brandon spent the day with friends, behaving as if it were any other day, showing no apparent signs of distress. They went bowling and chatted normally, with none of his friends noticing anything unusual. At some point between Saturday and Sunday, Brandon wrote a letter to his parents, revealing his anguish over his actions. Though he avoided explicitly mentioning the crime, he confessed to something terrible that would likely result in his imprisonment or death. He was certain that sooner or later the police would catch him. As investigators delved into Allie's social circle, Brandon emerged as a potential suspect. The team focused their efforts on trying to contact him, but all calls to his cell phone went unanswered. On Saturday afternoon, the police visited Allie's family to deliver the devastating news. The words hung in the air, creating a surreal sense that they were living a nightmare. Overwhelmed with grief, Cindy and Keith had to face an unimaginable reality. Allie's close friend Maddie struggled to make sense of what had happened, her mind flooded with memories of the time spent with the friend she considered a sister. Meanwhile, the police continued their attempts to reach Brandon. By then, he had left his friend's house and was driving his truck. Allie's cell phone remained missing. The news of the crime shocked the university community and local residents. However, due to the ongoing investigation, the police withheld further details. As a result, it was unclear whether the attacker had killed Allie at the lake or abandoned her there afterward. The same confusion surrounded the murder weapon and the connection between the victim and the perpetrator. This changed when investigators made a crucial discovery. In Allie's room, they found her smartwatch, which turned out to be an invaluable piece of evidence. The smartwatch allowed them to uncover some of the text messages exchanged between Allie and Brandon. Realizing the urgency, the team immediately tried to contact Brandon, who this time answered their call. He apologized for not responding earlier and made excuses to avoid meeting with the officers, but promised to come to the police department first thing on Monday, July 22nd. After hanging up, fully aware of his predicament, Brandon continued to travel as far as possible. On Sunday, July 21, 2019, he arrived at another friend's house carrying an unusual item, a firearm. He made no effort to hide it and even unloaded it in front of his host. Brandon also brought a six-pack of beer, so they sat down to drink, chat, and watch television. The next morning, he left without attending the scheduled meeting at the police department, thus becoming a fugitive. Detectives obtained an arrest warrant and began tracking Brandon's phone. Having left Mississippi, Brandon's location was soon identified as Memphis, Tennessee. Authorities issued an alert for his truck, which had a distinctive license plate. It didn't take long for the Memphis Fugitive Task Force to get a positive result. About an hour and a half later, the prime suspect, wearing a blood-stained shirt, was apprehended outside a gas station in the southwest part of the state. The operation involved at least 12 officers and 7 police patrols. Inside the vehicle, they found a firearm matching the one used in Allie's murder. Mississippi investigators were promptly notified. They headed north to pick up Brandon. Upon arrival, he found Brandon calm. He read him his rights and then transported the suspect back to Mississippi in custody. Once they reached the station, Brandon recounted his activities during the weekend of the crime, revealing that he had been roaming around Oxford from Friday to Saturday. Beyond that information, Brandon remained steadfast in his right to remain silent, refusing to provide further details to the investigators. He was detained at the county jail, and his family soon hired an attorney to handle his defense. In a statement, Brandon's father insisted that his son was not involved in the incident. He urged everyone to presume Brandon's innocence, confident that the ongoing investigation would reveal what he believed to be the truth. However, he was unprepared for what was to come. The first blow came when a university spokesperson confirmed that Brandon was suspended from the institution. Meanwhile, Allie's autopsy revealed that she was not pregnant at the time of her death, but this information was not shared with the media. Allie's funeral took place on Saturday, July 27, 2019. Friends, family, and community members left flowers and condolence notes. Despite their indescribable grief, they felt fortunate to have known such a vibrant and luminous young woman. In August of that year, Brandon was charged with first-degree murder. If found guilty, he could face the death penalty. His name made headlines. When Rex heard the news, he was initially shocked, but soon, everything seemed to make sense. He recalled all the rude and contemptuous comments Brandon had made about various women. For the prosecutors, the case became a textbook example of ignored warning signs in relationships that can lead to tragic endings. They believed that Allie's death could have been prevented. As the search for evidence continued, investigators discovered the letter Brandon had written during that weekend while searching his apartment. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed the start of the judicial process, requiring extra patience from Allie's friends and family. However, the investigators used this time to continue their work, sifting through hundreds of text messages between Allie and Brandon, a daunting task. Meanwhile, the prosecutors continued to build their case, gradually uncovering the details of an unequal love story. A series of facts, previously unknown to those close to the university student, came to light. When the case was finally presented to a grand jury in mid-2021, the evidence included photographs of the gun and bullet casings, as well as the letter. To the prosecutors, this letter was clearly a confession. However, the defense presented a completely different perspective. As Brandon pleaded not guilty, his lawyer argued that the letter was merely a farewell note, as Brandon had contemplated taking his own life at that time. To support this claim, the defense mentioned that Brandon himself had stated he was holding the gun to his head when he suddenly fainted. It was during this moment that the courtroom learned from Allie's autopsy report that she was not pregnant and had no evidence of ever having been pregnant. The revelation caused an unmistakable shock. The trial proceeded until, unexpectedly, in August 2021, just a week before the sentencing, Brandon chose to admit his responsibility for the crime. He and his legal team reached a plea agreement with the prosecution to avoid the death penalty, Instead, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Brandon addressed Allie's family, apologizing for the immense pain he caused by taking their daughter's life. He acknowledged that his actions had permanently altered the lives of the Kostiel family and his own. He expressed a desire to turn back time and undo his actions, but knowing that was impossible, he sought forgiveness from God and hoped that one day they might find it in their hearts to forgive him. Following Brandon's statement, the victim impact statement was read aloud in court, delivered by Cindy, Allie's mother. In her letter, she expressed regret for not being able to keep her daughter away from Brandon, whom she described in stark terms as a monstrous, heartless, scheming, ungrateful, sinister, violent, and corrupt individual. Cindy also added that Brandon had every opportunity to do good in the world, but chose to do evil. Because of that choice, he would spend every day of the rest of his life in prison. She reminded everyone that it was an atrocious act he committed against a sweet soul like Allie, and predicted that every time the cell door slammed shut, it would be a reminder of what he did and the life he took. Those who knew Allie hold on to the certainty that the actions of her attacker will never extinguish the sweet light she brought into the world. On the contrary, they know that her spirit will live on through the lives she touched, as Allie always strived to make the world a better place with every step she took. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Sony Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981 in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She was the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and had 2 sisters and 3 brothers, along with a large extended family. This close-knit environment allowed her to forge a special bond with her cousin Jenny. As she entered her teenage years, Sony became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, at just 17 years old and in the 8th grade, she met a man in his 20s named Lakeith Moody, with whom she soon began a relationship. Unfortunately, Lakeith was abusive, and his violent behavior left visible marks on Sony's body. Despite their tumultuous relationship, they had 4 children together, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Sony's mother noticed a bruise on her daughter's chest, which Sony tearfully admitted was caused by Lakeith. One of her friends also observed injuries, but Sony refused to report him. Lakeith was controlling and often tried to isolate her from friends and family. That same year, Sony moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the apartment management notified her of a disturbance at her home. When she arrived, she found her apartment in disarray, furniture slashed, clothes missing, the television destroyed, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including down the stairs. Written on the mirror in red nail polish was the message, "Kiki loves you," Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. On October 31, 2000, Sony, her cousin Pamela, and Lakeith were at a bar called Mirage. During their time there, Lakeith slapped Sony and threw a drink in her face. Sony and Pamela left the bar and sat in the car where, according to Pamela, Sony was shaking and trembling. She asked Pamela to take her home before Lakeith arrived. Once home, Sony secured the door with locks and chains. An hour later, Lakeith arrived, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela only managed to get Lakeith to leave when she threatened to call the police. Once Sony calmed down, her cousin left her alone at home. However, later that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Sony was in the hospital. Somehow, Lakeith had gained entry to the house. When Sony tried to end the relationship, he retaliated by tearing her clothes and beating her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She ended up with bruises all over her body, a loose tooth, and even lost consciousness as Lakeith Moody had choked her until she passed out. Not long after, Lakeith Moody found birth control pills in Sony's apartment and assaulted her again. The next morning, Sony called Pamela, asking for a ride to the hospital due to a miscarriage. By late 2008, at the age of 27, Sony was working at a Christian academy. She was a reliable employee who always arrived on time. Therefore, when she missed work or requested time off, it was usually for significant reasons. On one occasion, she called her employer to say she couldn't come in because her face was badly bruised and she didn't want the children to see her like that. Leslie granted her the day off. When Sony returned a few days later, her bruises were so severe that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses inside the academy. She confided in her boss about how her boyfriend had once chased her in his car, trying to force her off the road during the pursuit. Lakeith's violence wasn't limited to Sony and their children. In April 2008, he was found parked in an SUV with a firearm, despite being prohibited from possessing one as a convicted felon. He had already served 2 years in prison for theft and another 3 for drug possession with intent to sell. Despite Sony's efforts to distance herself from him, it was nearly impossible. The situation reached a critical point on October 6, 2008. That day, Sony did not show up at the academy. At 5 p.m., her boss received a text message from Sony, stating that her boyfriend was holding her hostage in her own home and had been beating her all day. She then provided her address. The boss called the police, and 2 officers arrived at the residence. They knocked on the door, but it was locked from the inside and there was no response. They called the fire department, who broke down the door. When the officers entered, they saw Lakeith jumping out of an open window at the back of the apartment. Sony stood in a hallway, crying and unable to speak due to her distressed state. Her 4 children were with her, completing a heartbreaking scene. She was covered in bruises and scratches on her face and neck. Once she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. She and Lakeith had started arguing and he refused to let her leave the house. She informed the officers that they didn't answer the door earlier because Lakeith wouldn't allow her or the children to go near it or the windows. She mentioned that Lakeith had hurt one of their children by grabbing him and had prevented her from taking him to the hospital. Sony detailed that her boyfriend had been physically and verbally abusing her, even tying a baby blanket around her neck and choking her until she lost consciousness. During the conflict, when the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to suffocate her again, promising that next time he would make sure to kill her. The officers searched the area but could not find Lakeith. Sony left the house with her children in her car. 3 days after this incident, she applied for a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any further contact with him. However, she missed the court hearing on October 23rd, and the protection order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead he started a fight with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly escalated as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She managed to break free and ran out of the apartment with Lakeith yelling death threats after her. Lakeith didn't catch her but instead grabbed their youngest child, an infant, and drove off at high speed. A police patrol, alerted to the domestic disturbance, arrived just as Lakeith was fleeing. The officers attempted to stop him, but he evaded them and escaped. By early 2010, 28-year-old Sony was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. Her fifth child was 9 weeks old and in such fragile health that she had to stay home to care for him. In January, Lakeith, Sony, and their children moved together into the Budget Lodge Motel in Memphis. The very day they moved in, their arguments were so loud that the motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Peace was elusive. Their fights were constant, annoying the neighbors and the management with the noise. On January 22nd, the hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a highly agitated state. He arrived at high speed in Sony's car and began shouting at her while she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In the heat of the argument, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The guard approached and told him they couldn't make so much noise or throw objects and that they needed to finish the argument inside their room. Lakeith simply told him to mind his own business. He locked the car and walked away, with the guard following him to a third-floor room not registered under anyone's name. Later, the guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had, and to his surprise, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms despite not being registered as a guest. The next day, the troubled couple moved with their children to room 222. That evening, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave, and though he complied, he soon returned. The fights continued for a few more days until the same security guard, who had repeatedly warned them, asked Lakeith to leave the property for good. The receptionist tried to calm him down as he went to the parking lot, and the guard told him not to come back that night. Lakeith got into the car and drove away. On January 26th, Sony spoke with Pamela, confiding that many things were happening in her life and that she was staying at the motel. She expressed a desire to tell Pamela something important and said she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took her younger children to daycare and her eldest to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door, speaking to her through the window to inform her they needed to pay or leave. He returned several times that day. On one visit, around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to bring the money. Later, the hotel security guard checked room 222 and found it empty. Children's clothes, bags, and various items were scattered on the floor and one of the beds, while the other bed was neatly made. That same day, January 27th, Sony failed to pick up her eldest daughter on time. The school secretary called Christine, the child's maternal grandmother, to come and get her. Christine tried calling Sony, but received no answer. Around 6 p.m., Christine discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Worried by the lack of response, she asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school. Convinced something was wrong, they contacted the police, who came to the house around 10:30 p.m. and filed a missing persons report. On January 28th, the housekeeping manager entered the now empty room 222 again. This time, he began cataloging and tagging the belongings left behind by the tenants who seemingly fled to avoid paying their bill. The room contained piles of clothes and a large garbage bag which were taken to the storage area. Once the room was emptied, it was cleaned and made available for new guests. The next occupants were James and Rhonda Sargent, who moved in on January 29th. The new tenants noticed a foul odor and tried to mask it with incense, but it wasn't enough. They also noticed that the previous occupants had attempted to do the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. The smell was particularly strong when someone sat on the bed. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Soni's whereabouts, as it was the last place she had been seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was found on February 2nd and around 7 p.m. inside Soni's car parked at a shopping center. He was arrested for vehicle theft and held in police custody for 48 hours. That night, he was questioned about Soni's disappearance. He claimed the last time he saw her was on January 26th. He explained that they met around 7 a.m. in the hotel parking lot after she returned from dropping off the children at school. They went into the room, were intimate, and then went back outside. He took Soni's car keys and left the hotel. Lakeith stated that Soni planned to use her social benefits and a school loan to buy a new car, so it wasn't a problem if he kept hers. He claimed he had been living in the car since January 26th. Investigators, however, discovered that he had actually been staying at another hotel. Additionally, it was unlikely he spent nights in the car due to the snow during that period. On February 3rd, a debit card with Soni's name and several recent purchase receipts were found inside the car. That same day, the police examined the clothes placed in storage at the hotel, hoping to find DNA or other evidence, but came up empty-handed. Adding to their frustrations, Lakeith had to be released due to insufficient evidence linking him to Soni's disappearance. Meanwhile, Soni's cousin and her mother endured the painful task of going to the hotel to collect Soni's belongings. Her cousin had a terrible premonition, but found nothing to support her feelings. On February 4th, the police visited Moody's uncle's house and found a DVD player from the hotel room in Soni's wallet. Moody had given these items to his cousin. The cousin told the police that Lakeith had borrowed the DVD player on January 24th, supposedly to watch a movie, and was driving a red car that day. A few days later, the cousin saw Lakeith again and asked why he hadn't picked up the children on January 27th, but Lakeith avoided the question. When he inquired about Soni's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet in a bag and left the house. As the days passed, James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved from room 222 due to the persistent bad odor. With no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Subsequent guests in room 222 also complained about the foul smell. Despite numerous cleanings and a carpet wash in early February, the odor persisted, only slightly reduced for a few days. Soni's family, especially her children, were deeply affected by her absence. Their only hope was for Soni's safe return. On February 4th, homicide detectives visited the hotel. By then, the room had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. The detectives did not enter the room but asked the staff if they noticed anything unusual. All responded negatively. On February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel, changing rooms 3 times, including spending one night in room 222. The sergeants informed the management that the room still reeked of the unpleasant odor. In March, a more thorough cleaning was carried out, which included the carpets, bedding, bathroom curtains, and window drapes. To everyone's dismay, the smell not only persisted but intensified. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard, and during their conversation they recalled that the former tenant, Soni, had disappeared at the end of January. The guard remembered the events from that time and suggested that the manager inspect room 222 for blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they discovered was shocking. The two men entered the room, where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the frame. The lower part of the bed frame had a sort of enclosure that prevented using the space underneath as an unsightly storage area. However, lifting the box spring revealed a large empty space where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the solid edges of the frame, they saw something unimaginable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame had marks all over it, and there were two broken wooden areas. Near the head of the bed was a towel and a cloth bag between the legs of the body, which was wearing a shirt but was naked from the waist down. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, went under one arm, around the chest, and ended at the back. The forensic examiner concluded that it would have taken at least 2 to 3 minutes of continuous pressure to cause death. DNA samples matched Sony's genetic profile and female markers. Male genetic material was also found on 5 parts of the cable. The main hypothesis was that Sony had already been dead when she was reported missing, and that Lakeith had used the coaxial cable from the DVD player he had borrowed from his cousin, indicating premeditation. Lakeith was found and detained by the police shortly after, not for the discovery of Sony's body but on a different charge, possessing a firearm despite a prior felony conviction. Nonetheless, at the time of his arrest, he was considered a person of interest since he was the last person seen with Sony alive. Additionally, he was again in Sony's car when he was arrested and sent to the detention facility in Mason. On March 18th, the police announced an internal investigation to determine how the case had unfolded so strangely. He stated that the family deserved answers and explained that while the officers were eager to resolve the case, they had pursued a different path that led away from the room. They also stated that they had ever encountered anything like this, noting that the discovery surpassed fiction and highlighting the drama of domestic violence. He regretted that the room had been cleaned and rented multiple times since Sony's death, complicating the police's evidence collection efforts. This explanation was met with skepticism. Shortly after, Rhonda, one of the first tenants to stay in the room where Sony's body was found, spoke to the media. She mentioned that if the officers had asked to enter the room during their January visit, they would have been allowed. She reasoned that, unlike her and her husband, the officers should have recognized the smell of a decomposing body and found Sony much earlier. Finally, the time came to give Sony a loving and dignified farewell. Her funeral was held on March 24th. Sony's children were placed under the care of her sister and her husband. By April 1st, they were making efforts to obtain legal guardianship of the children. She stated that while the children were the primary victims, the lives of everyone in the family were disrupted by the tragic loss. She expressed that while she couldn't bring her sister back, she was determined to care for Sony's children, ensuring they had food, clothing, and toys and keeping them together as a family. Sony had been a beneficiary of a social program that periodically credited funds to a card for grocery purchases. The card had been loaded shortly before the crime, as part of a tax refund on her income. The police tracked the movements of this card, which was found in Lakeith's possession. This effort proved successful, revealing that the card had been used on February 1st, 4 days after Sony's disappearance, at a convenience store. Sony usually visited the store on the 1st of each month to withdraw cash using her electronic benefit transfer card. Officers went to the store and asked the owner for access to the footage from their 16 security cameras on the morning of February 1st. At 11:38, the surveillance system captured a man in yellow using Sony's card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdraw some cash, and purchase a cigar. After making the purchases, he returned to a car driven by another person. With all the evidence against him, the trial for Lakeith began in the first week of February 2014, over 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel had closed. Lakeith pleaded not guilty, while the prosecutor described the situation as a very ugly and tragic end to a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, the defense attorney emphasized the lack of conclusive evidence, including witnesses or material proof. He argued that there was no evidence of premeditation, only the prosecution's speculations. He pointed out that the police had found a fingerprint on the bed frame that did not match Lakeith's. He suggested that someone else might have killed Sony, as she had been involved with other men over the years. He insisted that his client had never been arrested for domestic violence against her. Additionally, he revealed something that had not been public knowledge. Sony had moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's house due to a rat infestation. On February 6th, the video showing Lakeith using Sony's prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented in court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor during the transaction indicated innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold-blooded and ruthless man unbothered by the crime he had allegedly committed. On February 7, 2014, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and was automatically sentenced to life in prison on February 10th. He appealed the sentence, arguing that the court had erred in considering past domestic violence acts and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction, confirming the sentences. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
Obviously, the one question is, everybody's asked me, why? I understand why Casey, why the boys, why your daughter.
Michael Wayne Jones was born on May 1, 1981, in the small town of Brattleboro, situated in Vermont, USA. While the identities of his parents remain unknown, it is evident that his family life was fraught with complexity and difficulty. From a tender age, Michael was a witness to the repeated physical and mental abuse between his parents, and he too was a victim of this mistreatment. These issues seem to be a tragic and enduring legacy, affecting both sides of his family. During Michael's early years, his father was incarcerated for reasons that are still unclear. This event deeply affected Michael, creating a profound sense of emptiness in his life. Seeking a fresh start, his mother remarried and had another son named Dana. Michael found some joy in having a sibling, but their home life remained far from ideal. His stepfather's inability to maintain steady employment placed the entire financial burden on his mother, who was forced to take on 2 jobs. Compounding their difficulties, Michael's stepfather exhibited aggressive behavior toward both him and Dana. The use of violent disciplinary methods created an environment of fear and oppression. If Michael arrived late to school or made a mistake, he was harshly punished, often locked in a shed and subjected to sexual abuse. Despite the harshness of his life, Michael showed a generous and protective nature. In such dire circumstances, he often took on the role of protecting Dana, sometimes enduring punishments meant for his brother to spare him the pain. This courageous and loving behavior forged a strong bond between the brothers, with Michael becoming a figure of admiration for Dana. The stepfather's control was so stringent that Michael was rarely allowed to interact with other children from school or the neighborhood. His mother, living in fear of her husband, was unable to confront or oppose him. This created an atmosphere of isolation, secrecy, and oppression within the household. Without any external support, Michael and Dana had to endure the ongoing abuse. The bleak atmosphere of their home did not go unnoticed by the neighbors, who began to suspect the presence of abuse. On one occasion, driven by desperation, Michael ran away from home. But Michael had no clear destination, so he was eventually found by the authorities. When questioned about his reasons for leaving, he shared the difficult story of his family life. However, he received no assistance regarding his situation. Despite his efforts to appear fine to those around him, Michael's true feelings were hidden beneath the surface. As he entered adolescence, his low self-esteem significantly affected him, leading to a depression that required medical treatment. The only respite from his pain was his high school. There, despite his introversion and loneliness, Michael felt somewhat at ease as responsibilities helped him forget his oppressive home life. He was fortunate to meet Dorothy, who owned a nearby business. She introduced him to her daughter, whose name remains unknown. Michael formed a friendship with the girl, which eventually turned into an on-and-off relationship. This special connection allowed Michael to reveal a kind, affectionate, and protective side of himself. Dorothy was delighted by this new facet of Michael, but was also concerned. He always seemed on edge when it was time to go home. Although Dorothy's daughter often visited him, Michael did everything he could to keep her away from his house. With so many signs, Dorothy finally decided to delve deeper in her conversations with Michael. He then confided in her about his constant worry for his mother and brother's well-being. This allowed her to glimpse the emotional burden and anguish he carried. Their friendship provided Michael with a temporary respite from his difficulties, a space where he could express his feelings. After high school, Michael made a life-changing decision by joining the United States Navy. This marked the beginning of a new chapter, providing him with a clear purpose within a highly structured environment. As he developed a deep love and attachment for the Navy, Michael realized how right his choice had been. This sense of well-being was largely due to the new friendships he formed with his fellow servicemen. Despite occasionally drinking, he always showed up for work and proved to be a calm and relaxed individual. At the time, Michael was dating a fellow service member, whose name has been kept confidential. However, it became clear that the relationship was imbalanced, as she was physically abusive. This revived old shadows of his family environment. When his relapse into depression became evident, he decided to leave her. He then focused on excelling in his career, which included undergoing additional training to provide medical care in combat situations. This earned him an assignment with the Marines in a medical role. During this period, Michael met a young woman named Sarah. They fell in love and eventually got married. Following their marriage, Michael left the Marines to focus on his new role as a husband. Sarah played a crucial role in Michael's life, helping to keep him on the right path. Together, They welcomed 3 children, and Michael dedicated himself to being a good father, always striving to provide them with the best upbringing possible. Although Sarah took the lead in many decisions, Michael consistently supported her choices. Around 2011, Sarah found a job in Central Florida, specifically in Orange County, and the family relocated there. She worked at Mount Dora Animal Hospital, managed by Beau Delaporte. As weeks went by and Michael struggled to find a job, Sarah persuaded Beau to hire him, recognizing his work experience. Michael quickly adapted to his new responsibilities and demonstrated remarkable dedication. He always exuded joy, and it was evident to everyone that he loved his work, caring for animals and attending to their owners. His positive attitude made him highly sought after, with pet owners preferring his services. His employers grew very fond of him, especially Beau, who, beyond their professional relationship, extended his friendship and trust to Michael. Beau even began to delegate some management responsibilities of the animal hospital to him. Everything was going smoothly, and in 2014, Beau hired a new veterinary technician, Casey. Born on December 23, 1986, in the city of Ossian, Indiana, Casey was the second daughter of Nickley and David. Her siblings were Sarah and Brandy. From a young age, Casey was undoubtedly the heart of her home, her overflowing energy lifting everyone's spirits, even beyond her family. As she grew, Casey showed great love for others, driven by a special connection to her spirituality. No matter the challenges, her strength lay in her faith and personal values. During her time at high school, Casey met Richard. Initially, their attraction was mutual. However, after dating for a few weeks, Richard began to notice certain behaviors in her. Despite her kind side, Casey also exhibited jealousy and possessiveness. Her insecurity led to an abusive side, expressed through words and actions. Nonetheless, Richard persisted, and with patience and calm, they married after completing their studies. Over time, Casey's mother decided to move to Florida, and shortly after, Sarah and Brandy followed her. Given Casey's close relationship with her family, she and Richard also relocated to the same state in 2009. As they settled in, Casey found occasional jobs as a transporter and sometimes worked as a dog groomer while learning the trade of a veterinary technician. During this period, the couple welcomed their first child, Cameron, and their happiness was evident. Cassie showed immense maternal devotion, making Cameron's well-being her top priority. A few years later, their joy grew even more with the birth of their second child, Preston. The children thrived in an ideal environment, filled with laughter and the loving care of their parents. As Casey advanced in her veterinary technician career, she found a job at an animal clinic where she met Michael, who had become Beau's right-hand man. From the beginning, Michael and Casey got along exceptionally well, but Beau and his wife sensed that their apparent friendship hinted at something more. This attraction, despite being inappropriate given the circumstances, was undeniable for Michael, even at the risk of being discovered by Sarah. The inappropriate attraction affected Michael's focus at work, leading to a decline in his performance, although he was always eager to meet Casey's needs and requests. She reciprocated his attention, and it wasn't long before they embarked on an affair. Eventually, both decided to divorce their respective spouses. Sarah gained custody of their 3 children and moved to Jacksonville, while Casey and Richard agreed on shared custody with fixed schedules that Casey strictly adhered to. She took responsibility for transporting Cameron and Preston, diligently fulfilling her parental duties. Meanwhile, Beau grew increasingly frustrated with Michael's declining performance. Additionally, Michael made inappropriate advances toward other clinic employees. When Michael requested leave to travel to his hometown, claiming his mother's death, Beau later discovered it was a ruse for a beach vacation. This betrayal led Beau to terminate Michael's employment. In retaliation, Michael broke into the clinic, stealing money, computer equipment, and even a weapon. Bo identified Michael as the culprit and reported him to the police. With Casey's help, Michael fled to New Mexico but was eventually captured and brought to justice. However, after a brief stint in prison, he was released. Despite everything, Casey's trust in Michael remained unshaken. They soon moved in together, and Michael took on the role of stepfather to Cameron and Preston. By 2017, around Halloween, Michael and Casey finally tied the knot and moved into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom trailer. Despite the limited space, the modest rent made them feel fortunate to have each other. That same year, they welcomed their first daughter, Mercali, followed by Ayanna the next year. While Michael worked as a construction laborer to support their 4 children, Casey took pride in her role as a homemaker. She cherished every stage of her children's growth and sought ways to preserve those unique moments. This led her to create a YouTube channel to share special milestones of their family. On the surface, their life seemed idyllic, with Michael exuding calmness and Casey's laughter often heard in the background of their videos. However, behind closed doors, the couple frequently clashed, and their arguments had become a constant issue. Distrustful of Michael, Casey made a habit of checking his phone. She also grew suspicious whenever he worked long hours. On the night of July 10, 2019, while the children slept, a heated argument erupted between them. The trigger was Casey's discovery of a supposed infidelity on Michael's phone. The confrontation quickly escalated from verbal to physical. In a fit of rage, Casey grabbed a baseball bat and shoved Michael with it. Overcome with anger, Michael managed to wrest the bat from her and, in a blind fury, struck her repeatedly, ultimately killing her. Michael then placed Casey's body in a plastic bag and stored it in a closet. He attempted to clean up the scene as best as he could. The next morning, he decided to take further steps to avoid the children discovering what had happened. He loaded her remains into his car. In the following days, to avoid suspicion, Michael continued to share content on Casey's social media accounts. On July 26th, pretending to be Casey, he texted Richard asking him to take care of Preston and Cameron. He did the same with Casey's mother, instructing her to look after Mercali and Ayanna. When Richard came to pick up Cameron and Preston, he found Casey's absence strange and voiced his concerns to Michael, who brushed it off, saying she had left town for a few days. Casey's mother had a similar reaction when she came for Mercali and Ayanna. That same day, Michael called Sarah, telling her that he was separating from Casey and needed to see his children while she worked. Later, he picked them up and took them to his residence. During the drive, the children noticed a foul odor in the car, similar to rotting meat. For 2 weeks, Michael continued to drive between his home and Sarah's residence to visit his children, all while Casey's lifeless body remained in the car. As days passed without any word from her daughter, Casey's mother began to sense that something was wrong. On August 10th, Richard returned Cameron and Preston to Michael, and this time, Casey's absence caused him much greater concern. During their brief conversation, Michael apologized for being the cause of their divorce and acknowledged the challenges Richard had faced during his time with Casey. As the new school year approached, Michael realized that the absence of the children and Casey would raise questions from the elementary school staff. One night, on an unspecified date, he dragged Cameron out of bed and suffocated him, then placed his body in a suitcase. The next morning, he did the same with Preston, this time putting the body in a garbage bag. A few days later, the trailer park owner served Michael an eviction notice, giving him a maximum of 2 weeks to leave. Amid this grim situation, Michael went to pick up Mercali and Ayanna. When Casey's mother saw him again, still without Casey, she had a nervous breakdown. Her mind was fixated on one question: Where was her daughter? As Michael drove with the girls, he was suddenly overwhelmed with guilt. He felt he had no choice but to turn himself in at a police station. However, after lingering at the entrance for a while, he changed his mind and drove back home. Once there, he filled the bathtub with water and drowned Mercalli and Ayana. After they stopped breathing, he placed their bodies in a plastic container. By early September, the approach of Hurricane Orion led to a state of emergency being declared in Florida. Many sought refuge in public shelters to protect themselves from the impending disaster. This situation provided Michael an opportunity to flee with the 5 bodies. He loaded them into his truck and drove north, planning to stay with Sarah and his children. Despite the ongoing emergency in Florida, Sarah never saw Michael call his wife or inquire about the children. This made her uneasy, but aware of the marital issues, she chose not to ask questions. After the hurricane passed, Michael's neighbors reported a foul smell coming from the trailer to the property owner. Assuming the Jones family had already left, the owner first peeked through the windows and then entered the trailer. Aside from the furniture and personal belongings, nothing seemed amiss, but the stench was unbearable. By this time, Casey's, desperate to find an explanation for her daughter's absence, speculated that Michael might be in trouble with the law again and was hiding. She concluded that her daughter might be in hiding for safety reasons, but instead of staying idle, she contacted the sheriff's office to request a welfare check on Casey. When the officers conducted the welfare check, they found the house empty and seemingly recently cleaned. However, the presence of cleaning supplies near the door contrasted with the persistent smell of decomposition. Despite this, the property owner arrived and asked the officers to leave. Meanwhile, with the body still in his vehicle, Michael left Sarah's house and drove across the state border into Georgia. There, near a wooded area, he disposed of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayana. While driving on the highway and checking his GPS, Michael lost control of his vehicle and crashed. Surprisingly, he emerged unscathed, but the vehicle was completely wrecked. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene and immediately noticed the terrible odor coming from the truck. When they opened the suitcase, they were met with a horrifying sight: Casey's remains. There, on the roadside and under the shocked gaze of the authorities, Michael confessed in detail to his gruesome actions, including the location of the children. Consequently, he was taken into custody. Upon hearing the news, Casey's family felt as though their world had collapsed. In a state of shock, they could not stop asking themselves how a human being could inflict so much harm on others, especially on babies. For the first time in her life, Sarah experienced hatred towards someone, as she later stated. However, the thought that Casey might have witnessed her children's deaths caused her the most pain. Based on the findings and armed with a search warrant, the agents returned to Casey's residence. Upon entering, besides the smell, they noticed a reddish stain on the carpet. They prepared to collect evidence at the scene. Meanwhile, the autopsies were being performed. According to the forensic report, Cameron had a fractured jaw but no other visible signs of trauma. However, a towel was found in his mouth. Preston had a noose around his neck. Mercalli and Ayana were found together in a small plastic bag containing a baby bottle labeled Ayana and a pair of pink sandals. Both had died by drowning. As for Casey, there was crushing on the front of her skull and face, indicating a blow with a blunt object, but no other traumas were found on her body. Michael agreed to be interviewed by the officers, and during the process he remained calm and precise in his responses, making no attempt to deceive the agents. On the contrary, Michael thanked the officers for capturing him, stating that there was nothing more he could do given the circumstances. Calmly, he then recounted the events chronologically, from the night of the fight with Casey to his subsequent arrest. When asked about the motive behind his actions, Michael responded that everything had accumulated in his life to the point where it seemed like the best and only way out. Beyond the logical impact of such a tragedy on everyone involved, it was particularly hard and cruel for Sarah to accept that her own children had been exposed to and lived with a man like Michael. Understandably, after learning the facts, Sarah suffered from mental health issues. Michael was charged with second-degree murder for Casey's death and 4 additional counts of first-degree premeditated murder for the deaths of the children. He pleaded guilty. This plea avoided a trial, moving the case directly to the sentencing phase. In this phase, a jury of 12 people had to decide between life imprisonment or the death penalty. As part of their strategy, the defense focused on Michael's difficult childhood and his mental health issues, presenting various psychological disorders as mitigating factors. However, the state prosecutors argued that the undeniable brutality of the case warranted the death penalty. In January 2023, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty in accordance with state law. During a brief 9-minute hearing, the judge sentenced Michael for his crimes. Additionally, he was given life without parole for Casey's murder. Michael's lawyer immediately filed the necessary paperwork to appeal the sentence. Despite this last effort on Friday, April 28, 2023, the judge upheld the previous sentence. Prosecutors expressed their satisfaction with the justice served for the victims' families. As he awaits execution, Michael remains behind bars. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.